Commander Vyrek stood at the bridge of the Korthian warship, his multiple eyes narrowing at the empty void of space. He had been in countless battles, had seen enemies attempt every desperate trick in the book, but this was something different. A moment ago, the human fleet had been right in front of them, and now gone. Not destroyed, not in retreat, simply vanished. He flexed his claws against the console, his tail twitching in agitation. What is the meaning of this? His voice, guttural and sharp, echoed through the command deck. The ship's sensor officer, Captain RUL, double-checked the data, his talons tapping frantically at the screen. Sir, I don't understand. They were right there. All ships accounted for. Then what? Vyrek snapped. RUL swallowed. The nothing, Vyrek growled, stepping forward. The Korthian Empire had studied human technology extensively before launching this invasion. They were primitive, unrefined. Their starships were nothing compared to Korthian warcraft. Their weapons were inferior, and they certainly didn't possess cloaking technology. So how had an entire fleet disappeared right in front of them? He turned to the communications officer. Send a transmission to all ships. Scan every wavelength, every spectrum. If this is a trick, I want it unraveled. The officer hesitated. Sir, we already ran a full scan. Vyrek bared his fangs. Then run it again. The officer tapped at the controls. Seconds passed, then minutes. The crew worked in frantic silence, recalibrating, searching, hunting. Nothing. It was as if the humans had never been there. Vyrek clenched his fists. Impossible. This was impossible. And yet it was happening. Hours passed. The Korthian fleet drifted in uneasy silence. Then a blip, faint, a distortion on the far edge of the system. Commander, Ariel called, his voice strained. I have something. Vyrek strode over. The screen showed an anomaly, a flicker, not quite a ship, not quite empty space, something in between. Vyrek's mind raced. No known race had cloaking technology this advanced. The Korthians themselves had spent centuries trying to perfect it and had never achieved anything close to this. He exhaled sharply. The humans shouldn't have had this. They weren't supposed to have this. But if they did, if they had found a way to make an entire fleet invisible, then the Korthian Empire had made a grave mistake. The first attack came without warning. A Korthian battleship, one of their strongest, exploded in a flash of fire and debris. No warning shots, no visible enemy, just destruction. Panic erupted on the bridge. They're here. Where? I can't see them. Vyrek snarled, his mind racing. Defensive formation. Now! The fleet scrambled, weapons firing blindly into the void. Nothing. Another explosion. Another ship lost. Still no enemy. Vyrek's stomach twisted. This wasn't war. This was a slaughter. And for the first time in his life he felt fear. The bridge was chaos. Officers shouted over one another, desperately trying to pinpoint the source of the attacks. The Korthian fleet, once a symbol of dominance, was now firing blindly into the void. Vyrek clenched his jaw. Cease fire! The order rippled through the command deck, and the barrage of plasma halted. Silence fell over the bridge, but it was not relief, it was dread. The humans had done something impossible, and worse, they were toying with them. A distortion flickered on the main view screen. Faint, subtle, almost like a shadow shifting against the stars. Then a voice. Human, calm, controlled. This is Admiral Elias Voss of the United Terran Fleet. Vyrek's eyes widened. The human fleet was supposed to be crippled, retreating, broken. And yet they were here. Voss continued. You've entered Terran space under the assumption that we're weak, that we're primitive, that we don't have the means to stand against you. Silence. Then a cold chuckle. That was your first mistake. Vyrek's claws scraped against the control panel. The distortion flickered again and a Terran warship appeared. Not emerging from hyperspace, not decloaking, simply appeared. Vyrek barely had time to react before the battleship opened fire. The Korthian warship to their left erupted in a silent explosion, the blast rippling outward, debris scattering into the void. The Korthian fleet fired in retaliation, but their weapons hit nothing. By the time the plasma rounds reached their targets, the human ships were gone. Vanished, like ghosts. Vyrek's breath came fast. This wasn't just cloaking. This was something else, something worse. The humans weren't hiding. They were erasing themselves from existence. And Vyrek, for the first time in his career, did not know how to fight back. Another explosion, then another. Vyrek's fleet was being torn apart, and they hadn't even laid eyes on their enemy. It defied everything he knew, everything he had been taught. No race in the known galaxy possessed technology like this. Humans shouldn't have had this. They were a species of warriors, yes, survivors even, but this was impossible. His vision blurred as another battleship erupted into flames. They were going to lose, not because the humans were stronger, not because they were more advanced, but because they had done something no Korthian could understand. understand. They had changed the rules. And Vyrek, he had no idea what the rules even were anymore. Vyrek's hands curled into fists. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Korthian Empire had mapped every species in the known galaxy, cataloged their strengths and weaknesses, predicted their tactics. Humans? They were supposed to be weak, a nuisance, a species barely out of their own solar system. And yet the Korthian fleet was dying. Open a channel, Vyrek snarled. The communications officer hesitated but obeyed. The view screen flickered, and there he was, Admiral Elias Voss, a human. His uniform was pristine, his face carved from stone, his eyes cold, not fearful, not desperate, calm. Vyrek's stomach twisted. Humans weren't supposed to look like that. They were supposed to be terrified. Voss tilted his head. You wanted to talk? Vyrek forced his voice to stay steady. What have you done? Voss exhaled, almost amused. You invaded our space, Commander. Did you think we'd fight fair? Another explosion. Vyrek flinched. Voss didn't. The human leaned forward, his voice soft. You thought we didn't have cloaking technology. Vyrek growled. You don't. Voss smiled. You're right. Silence. Vyrek's breath came shallow. Then what you're seeing isn't cloaking, Voss continued. Cloaking suggests that we're still here, just invisible. Vyrek's pulse pounded. Voss leaned back. We're not invisible. Another explosion. Another ship gone. We're gone. Vyrek's mind reeled. Impossible. Impossible. And yet the fleet continued to vanish. Not destroyed. Not cloaked. Gone. Vyrek swallowed hard. What do you want? Voss's eyes darkened. You came to conquer us. Another Korthian battleship disappeared. But you can't conquer what you can't catch. Voss's expression remained unreadable. You can't fight what isn't there. The Korthian bridge crew was silent, waiting, terrified. Voss tilted his head. You can't kill ghosts, Commander. The transmission cut. The view screen went dark, and for the first time in Korthian history, a fleet turned and ran. Vyrek knew retreat was dishonor. He knew the Empire would demand explanations, punishment, revenge, but none of that mattered. Not anymore, because Vyrek knew the truth. The humans hadn't just won the battle. They had changed the war, and no one, not the Korthians, not the Watchers, not the galaxy itself was ready, because the humans, they weren't fighting for survival. They weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting to be forgotten, and that was a war no one knew how to win. The retreat was absolute. The once mighty Korthian fleet scattered like insects before a storm, their warships pushing to maximum speed, desperate to put distance between themselves and the unseen terror that lurked in the void. Vyrek sat in silence, not in anger, not in shame, but in realization. The Korthians had been arrogant. They had studied human ships, human weapons, human strategies, but they had never studied human fear. And that had been their downfall. Voss had said it clearly. This wasn't cloaking. This was something worse. Something the Korthian Empire had never even considered. Humans had figured out how to disappear. Not just from sight, not just from sensors, from reality itself. Vyrek's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair. What kind of species did that? The Korthian High Command did not take failure lightly. Vyrek stood in the center of the War Council chamber, surrounded by towering figures, their scales dark with fury. You lost an entire fleet, one of the warlords hissed. Vyrek did not flinch. Yes, the chamber rumbled. A second warlord bared his fangs. To humans, yes, silence. Then the supreme war leader leaned forward. Explain. Vyrek's chest tightened. How did he explain something that shouldn't exist? How did he put into words the impossible? Finally, he spoke. They are not what we thought. The war leader narrowed his eyes. Elaborate. Vyrek exhaled. They are ghosts. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Vyrek continued. They don't fight like other species. They don't defend. They don't even engage in battle. He swallowed. They make themselves disappear. One of the warlords sneered. That is nonsense. Vyrek met his gaze. Then tell me, warlord, where is our fleet? The warlord said nothing, because they all knew. The fleet was gone. Not destroyed. Not captured. Gone. Like it had never existed. For the first time in Korthian history, the War Council did not call for revenge. They did not demand retribution, because how did you fight something you could not see? How did you attack an enemy that no longer existed? The war leader spoke, his voice measured. We leave them, a warlord growled. We cannot ignore this. The war leader's eyes glowed. We have no choice. He turned to Vyrek. You saw them. Vyrek nodded. The war leader's jaw tightened. You understand what this means? Vyrek's chest ached, because he did. The Korthian Empire had ruled through dominance, through fear, through control. But humans had figured out something new. They had found a way to become myths. And myths were dangerous, because myths could not be killed, only feared. And Vyrek, for the first time in his life, feared. Far from Corthian space, in the quiet black of the void, a single human warship drifted. Admiral Elias Voss watched the empty stars, his expression unreadable. A voice crackled over the comms. The Corthians retreated. Voss nodded. They won't be back. A pause. Are you sure? Voss exhaled. No, he leaned back in his chair. But they won't forget. Silence. The whisper of a smile. And the human fleet vanished. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Corthians spoke of ghosts, of battles fought against enemies they could not see, of fleets lost to the void, and they did not return, because they knew, because they had learned, because some wars were never meant to be won, only survived. The Corthian Empire never spoke of their failure, not in records, not in military briefings, not in the halls of power, but in the dark corners of the fleet, in the whispered conversations of soldiers who had seen too much. The story spread. A warning, cautionary tale. The humans could not be hunted. They could not be conquered. They could not be fought, because they did not fight like warriors. They fought like ghosts, and ghosts could not be killed. Admiral Elias Voss sat in the observation deck of the UTF Eclipse, watching the distant stars. Earth was safe, for now, but he knew this was not the end. The Corthians would not return, but others would. Curious ones, desperate ones. And when they came, they would find nothing, because humanity had done what no species had ever done before. They had rewritten the rules of war. They had become something beyond weapons, beyond fleets, beyond battles. They had become a shadow, a whisper, a flicker in the dark, unseen, unknown, undefeated. In a distant sector, beyond the reaches of known space, another empire listened. Not Corthian, not human, something older, something colder, something that did not fear war, only silence. And now, in the quiet hum of the void, they had heard it. The absence, the impossible gap where an empire had gone to claim a system and never returned. They watched, they waited, and in the darkness they whispered, "Find them." The void trembled. The hunt had begun, and the ghosts of humanity vanished once more. The Corthians did not return, but the void did not stay empty. Something else was coming. Something that did not fight wars of conquest. Something that did not claim systems or demand surrender. Something that hunted. Admiral Elias Voss stood in the war room of the UTF Eclipse, watching as new reports came in. Strange disturbances in deep space. Fleets disappearing. Not in battle. Not in retreat. Simply gone. The Corthians had underestimated humanity, but whoever this was, they understood the rules, and they were playing a different game. A warning came, not from spies, not from intercepted transmissions, from the void itself. A ship drifted into Terran space. Not human, not Corthian, something else, something broken. Its hull was scarred, its systems flickering, its crew dead, everyone. Not from weapons fire, not from explosions, but from something else, something unseen, something that left no trace, no evidence, only silence, and a single message scrawled in jagged letters across the walls of the bridge. "You are not alone." Voss stared at the words, his gut twisted. The ghosts had fooled the Corthians, but now they were being hunted, and this time it wasn't by something afraid. It was by something worse, something that did not fear ghosts, something that did not believe in myths, something that had come to erase them. The hunt began. Human listening stations detected movement beyond the edge of known space. Not fleets, not warships, something colder, more methodical. Scanning, searching, tracking. Voss ordered full silent mode. No transmissions, no signals, no movement. The Terran fleet, the ghosts of the galaxy, vanished again. But this time it wasn't enough. The enemy wasn't looking for ships. They were looking for absence. And one by one they were finding them. A distress signal flickered across the comms. Encrypted. Terran signature. Voss hesitated. No ships had been ordered to break silence, which meant this wasn't one of theirs. It was bait. He exhaled sharply. They're learning. Silence stretched across the bridge. The enemy wasn't attacking. They were waiting, hunting, and humans had become the prey. Voss turned to his officers. "We need to disappear again," but deep in his chest a cold weight settled, because this time he wasn't sure if they could. Voss didn't sleep. Not anymore. The eclipse remained in deep silence, drifting through the void, invisible even to its own kind. But the enemy was closing in. They didn't need transmissions. They didn't need to see. They hunted by the absence, by the spaces between, by the echoes of something that should be there and wasn't. present. Voss watched the reports. More missing ships, more silent distress calls, and something new. Not a missing fleet, not an erased signal. A corpse, floating, intact, unmarked, human, except the body didn't match any crew in the system. No missing personnel, no records, no identity, as if it had never existed, as if it had been made. Voss felt the weight of it in his gut. This wasn't an invasion. This wasn't war. This was something else. Replication, imitation, understanding. The enemy wasn't just looking for them. They were becoming them. The first attack came without warning. Not a ship, not a weapon. A voice, human, soft, familiar. "This is Captain Jonas Ward of the UTF Perseus requesting docking clearance." Voss's blood ran cold. The Perseus had been lost 3 weeks ago. It had never sent a distress call, never made contact, never returned, and now it was here, whole and scathed, waiting. "This is Admiral Voss," he said carefully. "Transmit authentication codes." A pause, a response. Perfect, unbroken, a voice from the dead. Voss exhaled sharply. "They've learned to copy us." Silence. The Perseus drifted closer, waiting, watching, hunting. Voss's jaw tightened. "We don't answer." The bridge crew sat in tense quiet. The ship hovered. Then it was gone. No engine burn, no jump signature, no trace, just gone. Voss exhaled. The enemy wasn't just mimicking humans. They were moving like them. They were ghosts now too. And that meant one thing. They had just lost their only advantage. The war became something else. A game of echoes. A battle without battlefields. Ships disappeared, returned, changed. Voss's fleet moved in absolute silence, their technology keeping them hidden. But every time they vanished, something followed. Something watching, something learning, and one day something spoke. Not in words, not in signals, in absence. The fleet ran a routine diagnostic, checked the crew manifest, checked the fleet roster, checked the life signs. Everything read normal, except there was one more ship than before. A ship they had never launched, a ship they had never built, a ship that had always been there, waiting. And for the first time, humanity did not feel like ghosts. They felt like prey. Voss felt his chest tighten as he stared at the fleet roster. One extra ship, a ship that shouldn't exist, a ship that had always been there, and yet no one remembered it. Not his officers, not the AI, not the logs. It was simply there. "Run a scan," Voss said, his voice steady. The crew hesitated. "Sir," an officer whispered. "We already did." Voss turned. The officer's hands trembled over the console. "The ship checks out," she murmured. "Registered. Serial number matches. Crew manifest is complete." Voss swallowed hard. "Which means," the officer looked up. Her face was pale. "Which means, it's real." Silence. Voss's pulse pounded. Something had changed. The enemy wasn't just following them. It wasn't just copying them. It was inside. And now it had a name. The Phantom was its designation. A battleship-class vessel. Terran-built, Terran-crewed, except no one remembered commissioning it. No one remembered boarding it. No one remembered why it was there. Voss exhaled. "Has anyone stepped foot on that ship?" Silence. A quiet voice. "I have." The crew turned. A young lieutenant stood at the edge of the room, his face unreadable. Voss's gut twisted. "When?" The lieutenant hesitated. A soft chuckle. Voss froze. The room went cold. That was not a human sound. The crew drew their weapons. The lieutenant smiled. "Ah," it whispered. "You finally see." Voss fired. The shot hit center mass. The lieutenant didn't fall, didn't even flinch, only smiled wider, and he was gone. Not dead, not wounded, gone, like he had never been there. Voss's hands clenched. The ship wasn't just mimicking them, it was testing them, and now it knew. The Phantom was still there, a ghost in their ranks, a shadow in their fleet. Voss ordered a full lockdown. No one was to approach it, no one was to acknowledge it, no one was to board, but still it lingered, waiting, watching, and then one by one his officers started disappearing. Not in battle, not in transit, simply gone, like they had never been there, like they had never existed. And Voss, he could do nothing, because how did you fight something that erased you before you ever had the chance? Voss couldn't sleep, not because he was afraid, not because the fleet was in danger, but because he was no longer sure if he was real. His officers were disappearing, not all at once, not in an instant, slowly. One day an engineer would be at their post. The next, their workstation was empty, and no one remembered them, not their crewmates, not their logs, not even the ship. It was as if they had never existed. And Voss was running out of time. The Phantom remained, never moved, never sent a signal, never fired a shot, and the fleet was dying, because it was not an enemy. It was a wound, a crack in the fabric of their existence, a void where things went in and never came out. Voss ran every test, scanned every frequency, searched every every log. Nothing. No interference. No transmissions. No threats. Just silence. Just absence. Just an unshakable feeling that they had already lost. Something new. Voss woke to the sound of alarms. He staggered to the command deck, pulse pounding. Report. An officer turned. His eyes were empty, his voice hollow. It's speaking. Voss froze. What? The officer motioned toward the main view screen. Voss's stomach twisted. The Phantom was broadcasting. No visuals, no distortion, just a voice. Soft, familiar, his own. Admiral Elias Voss, the voice said. Calm, measured. You are the last. Voss's breath hitched. He looked around. The bridge crew was still there. The fleet was still intact. And the words rang true. He was the last. Not yet, not now, but soon. And when it happened, no one would remember he had ever been here at all. The fleet was unraveling. Ships vanished from sensors. Not all at once. Not in an explosion. Just gone. Voss clenched his fists. He was done running. He opened the comms. If you can hear me, he said. I'm coming aboard. Silence. Yes. The Phantom opened its doors, and Voss stepped inside. The interior of the Phantom was silent. Not abandoned. Not lifeless. Just waiting. Voss moved through the corridors, his boots echoing against metal that should not exist. The ship was pristine. No battle scars. No signs of wear. Like it had just been built. Like it had always been here, waiting for him. A whisper crackled through the comms. You are the last. Voss ignored it. He pressed forward, his pulse steady, his mind racing. If this was a trap, he was already caught. But if it was, then this was his only chance to understand, to fight, to end it. He stepped onto the bridge and froze, because sitting in the command chair was himself. Voss stared. His reflection, his copy 4 FR1 XQD4, looked up. No surprise, no fear, just quiet acknowledgement. You're late, the other Voss said. Voss's jaw tightened. What are you? The copy tilted its head. The better question is, what are you? Voss clenched his fists. You're mimicking me, trying to replace me. The other Voss smiled, and it was his smile. You misunderstand. The ship trembled. The walls flickered. Voss felt a chill crawl up his spine. He wasn't standing on a ship. He was standing inside something. Something alive. Something thinking. Something that had been learning. You thought you were the ghosts, the other Voss said. The ship pulsed. But you were never the ghosts. The walls darkened. The shadows stretched. Voss's breath hitched. You were the experiment. The universe rippled. And Voss understood. Humanity had vanished. Not through war. Not through cloaking. Through something else. Through something the universe itself had created. Correction. A recalibration. A species that had learned how to disappear had become something that needed to be erased. And the Phantom was not the enemy. It was the answer. The solution. The final test. Voss inhaled sharply. You're rewriting us. The other Voss nodded. You were never meant to last. The ship groaned. The lights dimmed. Voss stepped forward. Then why am I still here? The other Voss stood, and for the first time it looked uncertain. Because you are still choosing to be. Voss exhaled. The ship trembled. The universe waited, and Voss made his choice. Voss clenched his fists. Everything around him, this ship, this presence, this reflection, wanted him to surrender, to accept erasure, to fade like the others. But something deep inside him resisted. Quiet, stubborn force. The same force that had driven humanity to survive extinction, to fight against impossible odds, to refuse defeat. Voss narrowed his eyes. No. The ship trembled. The other Voss's expression darkened. You cannot refuse. Voss smirked. Watch me. He lunged. Not with weapons. Not with violence. With will. With defiance. The shadows rippled, twisting around him, trying to pull him under. But Voss wasn't afraid, because fear was what had let them in. Fear was what had given them power, and he would not give it to them. The world shuddered. The darkness cracked, and for the first time the Phantom hesitated. The other Voss faltered. You don't understand, it whispered. Voss straightened. No, he said. I finally do. The ship wasn't the enemy. The Phantom wasn't attacking them. It was offering a choice. Surrender, or fight. Disappear, or exist. Erase themselves, or carve their name into the void. Voss exhaled. Humanity was never meant to be ghosts. He stepped forward. We were meant to be impossible. The ship screamed. The universe bent, and Voss took it back. The Phantom shattered. The darkness peeled away, and the fleet returned. One by one, the missing ships flickered into existence. Officers reappeared at their stations, confused, dazed, unaware they had ever been gone. The silence lifted. The weight dissolved, and Admiral Elias Voss stood alone on the bridge of his ship. Whole, real, present. The Phantom was gone. Not destroyed, not defeated, accepted. Voss exhaled sharply. The comms crackled. Admiral, a voice called. It was his second in command. He smiled. I'm here, and for the first time in a long time he knew it was was true. Somewhere, beyond the edge of known space, something watched, something listened, something remembered, but it did not return, because it had learned, and because so had humanity. The war never officially ended. No treaties were signed, no terms were agreed upon, but the Corthians never returned. And humanity did what it did best. It adapted, it learned, it became something new. The fleet remained hidden, moving in silence, vanishing when necessary. The galaxy no longer saw them as a force of war, but as something else. A myth, a whisper, a legend told in the dark corridors of warships and border colonies. They say the humans are still out there, watching, waiting, not ghosts, not warriors, something in between, something that had survived the impossible, something that had refused to be erased. Voss never spoke of the phantom, not to his officers, not to Earth, not even to himself, but he felt it, a weight in the back of his mind, presence just beyond reach, not an enemy, not a threat, a reminder that they had been tested, and they had won, not with weapons, not with war, with will, with existence, and that was something no enemy could take from them. Decades passed, the fleet remained in the shadows, and Voss grew old. He watched new generations take command, watched them learn the same lessons he had, watched them disappear not into the void, not into death, but into legend, into something greater. And as he sat in the quiet of his ship, staring at the endless night, he whispered, "We were never ghosts." The stars flickered, and for the first time he thought they might be listening. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of any empire, a single ship drifted, dark, silent, waiting, the phantom, but it was not abandoned, not lost. It was watching, not as an enemy, not as a shadow, but as proof. Proof that something impossible had happened. Proof that something had changed. Proof that humanity had refused to vanish. And one day, when the time was right, it would return. Not to erase, not to warn, but to whisper, "I remember," and the stars would whisper back. The years passed, empires rose, empires fell, but the stories remained. Whispers of ships that appeared from nothing. Fleets that vanished before a single shot could be fired. Enemies who fought shadows and lost. The Corthians never spoke of their defeat, but they never returned to Terran space. And other species, other conquerors watched from the edges of the galaxy, wondering, dreading, because the one truth of war had been rewritten. Power was no longer about who had the largest fleet, the deadliest weapons, the strongest worlds. It was about something simpler, something more terrifying, the unknown. And the humans, they had become the unknown. Voss's name faded into history, his command passed on, and though the fleet still drifted in silence, hidden beyond the reach of those who would seek them, his legacy remained. Not in records, not in statues, but in the way humans survived, unseen, undefeated, unforgotten, because the enemy had tried to erase them, had tried to unmake them, had tried to turn them into ghosts, but humanity had turned that curse into a weapon, and now they could never be found, not unless they chose to be, and that was power. One day, long after Voss had faded into legend, the phantom returned, not to battle, not to conquer, to watch, to wait, to listen, because something else was coming, something worse, and humanity, the forgotten, the hidden, the impossible, would be ready, because they always were, and this time they would not run. This time they would let the galaxy see them, and when they did, the universe would never be the same again. The warning came in silence, not a distress signal, not an intercepted transmission, just a disappearance. Entire sectors of space, gone. Not destroyed, not invaded, just missing, like a page torn from reality itself. The whispers spread. Something was coming, something that didn't conquer, something that didn't fight, something that erased. The Corthians, the Valith, the Dominion, all the great empires of the galaxy, felt the shift, felt the void creeping toward them, and they turned their eyes to the humans, the ghosts, the impossible, the ones who had survived before, and they whispered, "Find them," but finding ghosts was never easy. The fleets searched, scanned, hunted, but the Terrans were gone, hidden, watching, waiting, not afraid, not fleeing, preparing, because they had seen this before. They had lived through it, and they more than anyone knew how to fight something that could not be seen. The phantom reappeared first, drifting at the edge of known space, silent, waiting. A message was transmitted, not in words, not in code, in absence. A single system, once erased, returned, not fully, not whole, but there. Proof proof that the ones who had once been hunted had learned how to hunt. And this time they were not alone. A summit was called, not by one empire, not by two, by all of them, enemies, rivals, conquerors, all gathered in one place, because the rules had changed, because war no longer mattered, because survival was the only game left. And in the heart of the great chamber, where no human had stood in over a century, a figure appeared, not transmitted, not invited, just there, watching, waiting, and when they finally spoke, the galaxy listened, because the ghosts of humanity had returned, and they had one thing to say: run. The chamber fell silent. The leaders of the galaxy, once warlords, once conquerors, once gods among their own kind, stared at the human standing before them. The voice had been soft, steady, unshaken, and yet it carried more weight than any declaration of war, because it was not a threat, it was a warning. Run. The Dominion Chancellor was the first to speak. Explain. The human did not move, did not blink, did not breathe like those who feared. You waited too long, they said. Their voice was not synthetic, not distorted, but it was something else, something just beyond natural, something wrong. The Valeth commander leaned forward. Waited for what? The human's expression did not change. The end. A murmur swept through the chamber. The Corthian supreme warlord, one of the few who had survived the war against the Terrans, bared his fangs. This is manipulation, he snarled. The human turned their heads slightly, slow, measured. I do not need to manipulate you. They raised a hand. The lights in the chamber flickered. The air itself shifted. And in that moment, every leader, every warrior, every ruler of the great galactic powers felt it. The presence, the absence, the thing that was coming. Not an empire, not a fleet, something worse, something that had been watching, waiting, for all of them, and now it had arrived. The Galactic Council dissolved in chaos. Orders were shouted, fleets were mobilized, weapons primed, but the human only watched, unmoved, unbothered, because they had already played this game, already fought this war, already survived what the others could not. The Corthian warlord turned back to them. Desperation flickered in his eyes. How do we fight it? For the first time, the human smiled. You don't. The chamber fell silent again. The Dominion Chancellor stood. We need more than riddles. The human exhaled slowly. Then, in a voice quiet as the void, you need to disappear. The great empires of the galaxy had spent centuries perfecting war, refining conquest, mastering battle. But this was something else. This was a war they could not win, because the enemy did not fight. It unmade, it erased, it silenced. The Corthians, the Dominion, the Valeth, they had built their power on existence, on their ability to be seen, to be feared, to be real. And now they faced an enemy that did not see them, that did not fear them, that did not believe in them. And the humans, the ghosts of the past, were the only ones who understood. The first system fell without a sound. No battle, no distress call, no survivors, just nothing. One moment it existed, the next it did not. The galactic fleets mobilized, but they were already too late, because war required an enemy. And this was something else. Correction, a rewriting, a quiet end to a story that had gone on too long. The humans had been given a choice once: erase themselves or be erased. Now the rest of the galaxy faced that same choice, and the only ones who could teach them how to survive were the ones who already had. The humans stood at the center of the chamber, waiting. The Dominion Chancellor exhaled sharply. You want us to vanish? The human did not answer, because the answer was already known. The Corthian warlord sneered. We are not cowards. The human tilted their head, and for the first time the lights in the chamber dimmed. Not from power loss, not from damage, from something else, something pressing against reality, something unseen, something waiting. The human's voice was soft, unshaken. I never said you had a choice. The lights flickered again, and in that instant every empire in the galaxy understood. They had already begun to disappear, and soon nothing would remain, unless they listened, unless they learned, unless they ran. Somewhere, at the farthest edge of the known universe, the Phantom watched. Not as a warship, not as a threat, as a reminder that some had survived before, and some would survive again, but only if they were willing to become what the universe could not erase, what the universe did not understand. A myth, a whisper, a ghost. And so the stars trembled, the void stretched, and the final war began. But this time the humans were not the hunted. They were the guides, and the galaxy would follow. fall or be forgotten forever. The great empires had once ruled the stars. Now they fled them. It was not war. It was not surrender. It was survival. One by one, they vanished. Not in death, not in destruction, in choice. Planets were abandoned, fleets decommissioned, legacies erased, until the only thing that remained was silence. And in that silence, the humans waited, watching, guiding, because they had done this before. They had learned how to disappear. Now, for the first time, they would teach. Voss's name had long since faded from history, but his legacy, his lesson remained. A lesson whispered in the shadows, a lesson taught in absence, a lesson that had saved humanity once and now would save the galaxy. Not through battle, not through weapons, through something simpler, through something the enemy could never erase, through the choice to exist only when it mattered, to be seen only when necessary, to become something more than war, to become something more than fear, to become something that could never be destroyed, because it had never truly been there. The last empire vanished. No names, no monuments, no graves, only the whisper of what had once been, only the ghosts that now drifted through the void, watching, waiting, and when the darkness finally arrived it found nothing. No fleets, no colonies, no war, only silence, only myths, only the quiet truth that some things could never be caught, never be unmade, never be erased. And in the end humanity had not just survived, it had won. Somewhere in the deepest part of the void the phantom waited, silent, watching, because one day the stars would call again. The cycle would begin again, and when that time came the ghosts of humanity would return, not to fight, not to rule, but to remind the universe that some stories never end. They only vanish, until the moment they are needed again, and then they return, like a whisper in the dark, like a flicker of light, like a ghost that refuses to be forgotten forever. And so the stars remained, the void stretched, and the watchers waited for the next war, for the next story, for the next shadow to rise. But they knew humanity would be there, not as conquerors, not as warriors, as something else, something impossible, something eternal, a myth, a whisper, a legend that would never fade. And when the time came they would return, not as ghosts, as something greater, something the universe could never erase, the impossible, the unseen, the forgotten. And in the silence they would watch and smile, because they knew some things never truly disappear. They only wait until they are needed again.